Many people might be convinced that gender inequality is from another bygone era. Yet scholars continue to identify important disparities in educational institutions, workplaces, and other organizations. Understanding how gender inequality manifests today often requires looking beyond obvious forms of discrimination and examining the ways institutions operate in practice. To help us explore these issues, I am pleased to welcome Professor Elizabeth Armstrong, the Sherry B. Ortner Collegiate Professor of Sociology at the University of Michigan. Dr. Armstrong is the co-author, along with Laura Hamilton, of Paying for the Party, How College Maintains Inequality. Professor Armstrong is one of the country's leading scholars of how gender inequality, higher education, and organizational life come together. Her research illuminates how institutions shape occupational and economic opportunities and outcomes for both women and men. Hello, I am Marvin King, and this is Civic Lens. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
First off, to people that might diminish the presence or consequence of gender inequality, how would you respond?
Well, I guess the first thing I would emphasize is that girls and women are roughly half the population and men and women are embedded in families and communities together. And so when gender inequality isn't recognized, it has consequences for everybody, for men and women both, in terms of loss of talent, if women are not given opportunities in schooling, loss of productivity if women are not given opportunities to excel in the workplace, loss of life in situations of intimate partner violence or homicide of women by the individuals in their lives, and all of these consequences radiate out to everybody that they know. So that ignoring these inequalities has major consequences.
I'm using the word misperceptions, and maybe there's a more accurate way of framing this, but do you find these misperceptions related to age cohort? For example, do college students have a different intuition on these matters than maybe older Americans?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So one of the things I'm really interested in now, I'm studying with a postdoctoral fellow here at Michigan, Hannah Tesler, how young people approach dating, sex, intimacy, marriage, children, because new survey findings suggest that heterosexual young men, are more interested in marriage and family than heterosexual young women. So in other words, women are less interested in partnering. And I think this is partly because there's been enough progress towards women's autonomy that they can, in fact, opt out of engaging with men in kind of family projects if they want to. So in terms of one difference is that older cohorts basically got married and engaged in kind of heterosexual family formation because they didn't see any other alternative. Now, for younger cohorts, they can take a look at the situation and go, do I really want to do this? And opt out if the terms aren't great.
So let me ask you a quick follow-up to that. When you say autonomy, I see here at the University of Mississippi, we are about a 57% female undergraduate student body, about 43% male. So when you say autonomy, is this financial autonomy? What do you mean exactly by autonomy?
Yeah, well, okay. So, for example, the kind of gender imbalance you see at your university is true all over the country. Women are receiving bachelor's degrees at higher rates than men, and they're like, okay, I can make it by myself. I can get a job. I can buy a house. I can have a great life. I need to, if I want to find a man and get married, I need to find somebody who is value add. And sometimes, and that means being treated respectfully and potentially more equally in a relationship.
I feel like there's some lessons here, but maybe that's for another time, but I feel like there's some good lessons here. What I'm hearing, though, it sounds like, well, things are great. Women go to college, they can take care of themselves. So, getting back to this inequality, you're a researcher. When it comes to measuring gender inequality, how do you measure that concept? How do we know that inequality exists?
Yeah, there are lots of different ways. You can ask survey questions. You can talk to people in kind of in an interview format. You can look at kind of administrative data, that is like large data sets that sort of exist, and you can kind of connect to. You can do content analysis of various sorts. Like for an example, you can look at are men and women being paid the same when they do the same work? Or you can look at wealth, like who all of the billionaires in the world, and you look at the number of women who are represented in those billionaires, they are a vanishingly small number. Okay, so that's at the extreme high end, but that becomes true, all the way down the line as well. Yeah, so if you look carefully at the numbers, they'll tell the story.
Okay. So you can measure it, you can look at surveys, that makes sense. It sounds like a mixed methods approach. There's lots of different ways
Mhm.
of demonstrating this. Getting back to these college students, they graduate, they go off to the workforce. Are there challenges that women are more likely to encounter as they enter the workforce than men?
Yes, very much so. I'm working on a paper with a former postdoc of mine, Corey Moss Peck, and he collected data from college students, as they were juniors and seniors of college at a big state university, and then followed them out into the workforce. And we've been analyzing the data on the early career experiences. And what we have been finding is that virtually all of these college educated women going into the workforce are experiencing sort of direct gender discrimination in their first jobs. Very sexist treatment on the part of managers and coworkers and clients. Just really, and they're finding that kind of like opportunities for advancement are sort of more available to the men than the women, and that the men just kind of, particularly the white men from middle class backgrounds and sort of in fields that are sort of masculinely coded, like engineering and business, they just enter a work world that's kind of designed for them. They're comfortable in the workplace. There's more men. They think that's kind of natural. They just very effortlessly kind of rise through the ranks, and so by the end of like even this kind of time, this short period of time, 3 or 4 years, the men's incomes have gone way up, and the women's have they've either dropped out of their original careers, like if they were in engineering or business, they've mostly left and gone into kind of other careers where to avoid the gender discrimination. So it happens fast.
I'm sure you could add politics to that list of occupations that are workplaces that are male coded. I taught an honors class here
Mhm.
once, and we did a group project. It was on legislative staff diversity. We went
Yeah.
down to the Mississippi State Capitol, and we were really interested in, how many men are working there, how many women are there as far as like the full-time permanent staff. Obviously, most of the elected officials are men, but in addition, the staff, right? The staff attorneys,
Mhm.
the lower paid workers tended to be more either women or minority
Mhm.
assistants, secretaries, cleaning staff. And so in terms of decision making, yes, you did see this. So are there you mentioned male coded professions. So it seems your research, or at least what your co-researchers are finding, is that across all professions, seeing the same thing. Are some professions worse or better? I don't know how to
Yeah,
phrase that
yeah, no, there
exactly.
really are differences, and it has to do, I think, with the kind of sort of the sort of gender stereotypes associated with the particular line of work, the proportion of the gender, ratio in the field, how kind of how hierarchical it is, how much diversity there is in leadership. I mean, around the Me Too kind of era, like 2017 or thereabouts, there started to be some organizational analysis of what were the kinds of organizations where you saw more sexual harassment. And there are definitely structural kind of organizational properties, highly, highly. masculine kind of coded organizations, a very hierarchical. If they have like a culture of kind of like overwork and features like that. So certainly the military, there's been more work on kind of sexual harassment and sexual violence in the military. We've seen recently, again, a whole new spate of political scandals related to sexual harassment and that, there's another round of hand wringing about like, oh, we thought we'd fix this, but lo and behold, no, the lower level staffers are still being harassed. Yeah.
Well, I'll admit to my own bias. I know male nurses,
Hmm.
but I instinctively code in my brain nurse as female, even though I know that's not true or accurate. But maybe I'm a product of my age and my generation, or how that profession has been uh, caricatured in television, news. I don't know. I can imagine someone like me in a hospital might assume a nurse is female and act shocked. If a male nurse comes in, I'm like, who are you? Right. And I wish that wasn't the case, but, and I think that's why earlier I was asking you about age differences with this. And I wonder if younger generations are better about assuming like what is uh, a male dominated profession versus a female dominated profession, or if they have some of the same hangups as older generations might, like, oh, you want to be an engineer, that's for guys, or like, I just don't know if
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I think it's complex right now. I think there's some pieces of it that I actually just don't really know, and I think would be more that there needs to be more research because on the one hand, I think in younger people are probably more open-minded and have seen a lot more kind of range of possibilities and have been kind of raised by parents who both of their parents are in the workforce and so forth. On the other hand, we are seeing the rise of this kind of new kind of manosphere, sort of new misogyny and this sort of like backlash or for where younger men especially maybe in some ways becoming more conservative. And I think, I mean, either the jury's still out or I haven't read the most recent research, but I think it's a mistake to just assume that there is a kind of natural sort of arc of progress, that every generation is going to be more kind of open-minded than the previous generation. I think there's a lot of like open questions right now about what direction things are going in. Like there's been a lot of like in terms of openness to a lesbian gay folks, there's been a lot of retrenchment, and kind of reversal and sort of degrees of acceptance recently. So I think it's complicated.
It's more of a two steps forward, one step back.
Yeah, right. Hmm.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So a lot of your research has focused on higher education specifically. So how might inequality manifest in higher education, gender or otherwise?
I think in a lot of different ways. I think, for example, all of the discussions about sort of elite admissions, I think, and all of the sort of rolling back of kind of being able to say take race into account in admissions and sort of and figuring out what actually is. That's I think one dimension. Of course, there's a lot of the issues about sexual assault and sex discrimination in higher education are still very kind of active and unresolved. I think there's still issues because there's still so much segregation by gender and race and class too in college majors that that is another way that these things manifest. I have a paper. This is just an annual review essay or a sort of a literature review essay with another colleague, Laura Hamilton, that looks at kind of race and class stratification in higher education and is like an exhaustive like review of all of the different ways that race and class play a role in kind of in sorting people differently into higher education options. I mean, the long story short is that wealthy white people monopolize pretty much the most desirable educational opportunities at every level from from preschool through graduate education in terms of like how systems work to like sort people into educational opportunities.
So this might be seen in terms of like majors or like
Majors, yep.
internships. I feel like in political science, one thing that we
Mhm.
see is the unpaid internship, which you have to be relatively well off to be able to afford a
Mhm.
summer without pay. But the best way to parlay your collegiate experience into a job is an unpaid internship. So there
Absolutely.
seems to be an advantage there that
Mhm.
no one really seems to be in a rush to address.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there are some schools in some contexts that actually pay for those internships, that if the employer won't pay, that the school will actually pay because they recognize that it's a way to sort of level the playing field by class. I think there's some program here at Michigan that does a little bit of that. I'm not really sure, but that is yeah. And that it was one of the things we really emphasized in paying for the party. Laura and I kind of found that given how much kind of class privileged parents kind of sponsor and devote and kind of channel resources toward their kids, not just paying tuition, but paying all kinds of like for the the study abroads and the kind of the all the extracurriculars and all of that things, and to to be able to participate in Greek life and not work and all of those things, that the amount that a university would have to provide to kind of level the playing field so that a student from a wealthy background and a student from a not so wealthy background actually really had the same resources and the same opportunities to have the same experience in college is just like huge.
We think of universities as, and they are statistically a leveler. They can help with mobility, but
Mhm.
that's not the same thing as leveling outcomes, obviously.
Yeah, people can go up, but if everybody else is going up too, they don't catch up necessarily. But also, when we were working on paying for the party, there's a whole sort of strand of research, like by Raj Chetty, who's an economist, at Harvard, and others, really looking at the kind of return on investment to colleges. And what they have found is that some schools do a really great job at helping people be upwardly mobile, and other schools just don't. That there's ways that the different ways that the universities work that either help close gaps or just maintain them entirely. People often don't really fully understand that there are these differences, and it's actually pretty hard, I think, even with more recent data available for like a parent or a young person who's thinking about college to really kind of understand or not a particular educational option is designed to do right by someone like them.
I had an administrative role on this campus for several years, and I would emphasize to students that there's 168 hours in a week. You're in class for 15 of them, and it's what happens the other
Mhm.
153 hours that really make a difference in your life as a student. And that's where the university can make a big difference because,
Mhm.
quite frankly, the biology your students are learning at the University of Michigan is the same biology our students are learning at the University of Mississippi. So much of the content is very similar, but it's the other things that happen at university life that can make a big difference in those outcomes afterwards. And Ross Chetty's work helps illustrate how universities can make a difference in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes.
So I'd like to once again thank Professor Elizabeth Armstrong of the University of Michigan for joining us on Civic Lens. Are there any metrics or data trends or just observational things that you pay attention to? So like as someone who's really interested in this and is like, I want to get into this, what might they pay attention to going
Mhm.
forward?
Well, everybody's interested in different things. One of the things I'm really interested now is in fertility decline. It's kind of the pronatalist thing is very conservatively coded, like that it's conservatives that are like, "Eh, go and have lots of babies." But I actually think it's interesting for everybody to pay attention to it. Not necessarily like, oh, this is a problem, go, have as many babies as you can, but rather like what's going on. what's going on with kind of gender and sexuality and gender relations and how men and women are interacting that may be leading to people to have fewer children. Because that I think is like thinking, and also I think looking at like what's happening with young people now, with people who are just coming of age and who are experiencing kind of the world that we're living in, the post-pandemic world, a world of a lot of political polarization, of economic precarity, potential climate catastrophe. And I think if we don't pay close attention to how young people are making sense of and making decisions based on, and not to mention AI, of course, which is changing everything, right? I mean, the change is accelerating. And yeah, so I'm kind of watching, just like everybody else, like trying to make sense of the changing world in which we are finding ourselves.
A lot of unknowns out there.
Mhm.
I always end by encouraging listeners to keep learning. If someone wanted to better understand how race and identity and inequality, especially in the workplace, come together, what would you recommend? I'm going to put a link to Paying for the Party
Mhm.
in the show notes. Is there anything else that you recommend to people who want to keep learning on this subject?
It just came across my email just a few days ago that there's a new book by sociologist, Gender Flashpoints, that Abby Sagi, who is thinking about how it is that people get so at cross purposes and thinking about kind of gender. I thought that looked really interesting. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I thought that was intriguing.
That's great. I will include that. And really, for me, what these discussions are about is get a little in depth with experts and encourage anyone
Mhm.
listening to learn more. And I feel like that's our job here at universities, is just to disseminate information and help people learn. So,
Great, wonderful. Well,
well,
thank you so much.
well, thank you, Elizabeth. I really
Yes.
appreciate your time.